What's going on, everybody? So I'm here to show you all my build for the upcoming beta for the Twisting Blade Rogue. Now, this is the highest DPS that I was able to find. Keep in mind that I am considering that we're not going to have access to as many skill points. We should have 21 total skill points because you start at level 1, we can go up to level 20, which is 19, plus an additional 2 from the Renown system. So with that in mind, I've adjusted the build slightly due to us not being able to access some of the later skills, which include things like the Shadow Clone from the ultimate, which is incredibly massive. Okay, we're missing out on an incredibly massive ability in the Shadow Clone. But with that consideration, let's dive into the build. First off, with the basic. Now, the main reason we're picking up the basic here is to acquire fundamental puncture here. The reason for this is we throw 3 blades in a spread, and if we hit an enemy with 2 of them, we make them vulnerable. Now, vulnerable gives us a percentage increase in our damage, which is massive. So that's one of the reasons why we're going with this. We're gonna go for 2 points into puncture and then enhanced puncture, and then we're gonna come down here to pick up our twisting blades, which is massive. I would then pick up enhanced twisting blades. Then we go ahead and pick advanced twisting blades. The reason for this is this skill in particular, or this enhancement towards twisting blades, is massive for all of our other abilities that we're going to be using and critical to keep our mobility high. Okay, twisting blades, you impale someone, and then when you run away from them, the blade will return to you. So the key thing here is that when we're clearing through dungeons, we might hit someone with a twisting blade, run past them, and then you're gonna kill hopefully everyone while you run past them. Or ideally, when we get to some of our mobility skills, we'll just teleport past people, right? After you picked up advanced twisting blades, which will reduce our cooldowns massively in our future skills, we're gonna come back up here and pick up fundamental puncture. Now, I basically never used fundamental puncture unless I'm fighting an elite or a boss, okay? Because oftentimes your normal mobs will just die to the twisting blades return, so you basically never need to deal with them besides just running past them, which is super fun. However, with some legendary items, which we'll go over later on in the video, this skill does massive damage in combination with the vulnerability from fundamental puncture, and you're gonna get some massive damage. Now, what I recommend doing is coming down here after we put all those points, right? We go puncture into enhanced puncture, coming down to twisting blades, enhanced twisting blades into advanced twisting blades. Then we come back up for fundamental puncture, and then we move down to our mobility skills, shadow step and dash. This is crucial. Now, normally I would suggest, we could go ahead and pick up enhanced shadow step into disciplined shadow step because we can reduce that cooldown and potentially do some dash upgrades. But I want to talk about some considerations later on, so I will let you know when to go for that one if you want to. After we pick up shadow step and dash, we're going to come back up and max out twisting blades. Twisting blades is our main damage dealing skill, so we absolutely would like to max that. Very important. After we've gone ahead and maxed that, the next consideration is, do we want a subterfuge skill? And they've actually gone ahead and nerfed the imbuements, as well as potentially gone some increasing on some subterfuge skills. However, I found that realistically, a lot of these do a lot of utility type things. Poison trap is actually really good. It does a good amount of damage. So if you want to put 1 point into poison trap just for the single target damage, which is really good. And then I typically like to pick up exploit, and I like to max out exploit. Why? This is going to give us 18% increased damage against healthy and injured enemies, which means anyone above 80% HP or anyone below 35% HP. And with twisting blades, you should always have those characters between those ranges. Either you're hitting them and they're just fresh, or you've just hit them and they should be way lower HP. So you're almost always going to get this unless you're talking about bosses. But even with bosses, you're going to get it for about 50% of the time, which is a nice increase in damage. And then we unlock the imbuement skills. Now, as I mentioned, you can come up here and put some points into shadow step instead of exploit. For example, if you want to go enhanced shadow step into disciplined shadow step and then only 1 point into exploit, that is totally fine as well. It really depends on how you've managed your twisting blades, because enhanced, or rather disciplined shadow step, reduces the cooldown by 3 seconds when you damage a new enemy, which is pretty impressive because the cooldown's 9, so it reduces to 6, and then you only have to land essentially 2 twisting blades and you have a brand new Shadow Step immediately. But if you're good with your Twisting Blades, you don't necessarily need that. So it really depends. I think both these are really, really solid options. And then we move into the imbuement section. And generally speaking, I want to go for Shadow Imbuement, okay? Shadow Imbuement is going to be absolutely massive. So what I do is pick up Shadow Imbuement, Enhanced Shadow Imbuement, and then you can go for potentially Blended Shadow Imbuement for additional vulnerability. But since we have Fundamental Puncture and we should be landing our vulnerability on the characters that matter, oftentimes going for something like Mixed Shadow Imbuement is actually pretty good. Why? Well, because we have Poison Trap, which again doesn't do physical damage. That's going to increase our Poison Trap damage. And any sort of other types of damage, like the Shadow damage, is going to do more damage. So although Blended Shadow Imbuement can be good, we already have a source of vulnerability on our Fundamental Puncture, so I don't necessarily like taking that. Then we talk about our last skill point, and this is where it gets a little bit interesting. With the last skill point, we can go all sorts of different directions. You can go back up, put another point in Puncture if you're using it quite a bit. I definitely don't recommend leveling up any more Shadow Step or Dash. You can put another point into Shadow Imbuement for potential extra damage, right? Which can be good. Or you could go down here for Enhanced Poison Trap for a little bit of CC. That can actually be quite solid. But as I mentioned earlier, with Exploit here, this is the one I would personally go for. If you're going with the previous version where you don't care about the Disciplined Shadow Step, going for Exploit and then Malice, which I have to actually put some points back into here because I actually removed too many. Going for the final point into Exploit or finishing off Exploit and then putting your last point into Malice is actually very good because it's basically they give us a 3% damage increase for any boss fight or any elite fight because we will keep them vulnerable due to our basic, okay? This is going to be the build. Again, one of the biggest modifications that you could consider is getting that Disciplined Shadow Step. One other thing I would like to mention is if you're on a more single target based fight, the Shadow Imbuement, what it really does is that it explodes characters when they die. But if you don't necessarily have the ability to kill someone, maybe like on a Shava or whatever, running Poison Imbuement and then running Enhanced Poison Imbuement and then actually running potentially Blended Poison Imbuement or Mixed Poison Imbuement, depending on where your stats are. If you have extra lucky hits, then Mixed Poison Imbuement can be good. Blended Poison Imbuement can be better if you have more critical strike chance, or rather critical strike potential. So anything like that. Shadow Imbuement for general content like dungeon clearing, etc. Poison Imbuement's gonna be a little bit better for a lot of the single target fights, which is gonna be pretty massive. Now, with that being said, I have two legendary aspects that I would like to mention here. So the first one is Blade Dancer's aspect, and I could mention a ton of different aspects for the build. I'm only mentioning my two favorite ones, and specifically Blade Dancer's aspect is incredibly important for this build. This is going to allow your Twisting Blades to orbit around you after returning, and it's going to deal additional damage based on the distance traveled. Meaning that if you're casting a Twisting Blade or puncturing someone, teleporting them or teleporting around with Shadow Step or dashes, and then you get that massive increased damage, and then guess what? You're gonna be absolutely destroying single target boss fights due to how much additional effective damage that you're getting from the Twisting Blades rotating around you, which is incredibly important. If you could pick one aspect, all the other ones that you could potentially run on this build are not even close to as important as Blade Dancer's aspect. But the other one I wanted to mention is going to be the Ravager's aspect. Now, this one's really, really fun because you actually get an additional charge with Shadow Step. Now, that might seem like, oh, well, who really cares, right? But if you kill an enemy with Shadow Step, it refunds the charge and it increases the damage of Shadow Step. So what's interesting about this is because you have two charges, each one of them has a cooldown. So reducing your cooldowns with Advanced Twisting Blades works on those charges, which means that you can start spamming out Shadow Steps even more than you had before. Even though it's a low cooldown already and very, very efficient, getting Ravager's aspect just totally changes the mobility in dungeons. There are situations that, oh, I just dashed and I have to wait for my Twisting Blade to return. But with this, you can like Twisting Blade, Shadow Step again, and then by the time you did that second shadow step, Twisting Blade is returning, and you've just annihilated like a whole row, gotten your charges back potentially, and just absolutely decimating people. So I really like this one as well. There are a bunch of other ones, like potentially, you know, random different general use aspects for just increased damage against vulnerable targets, etc., etc., etc. But these are my personal favorite two for this build. This is going to be an absolute massive build. Again, you'll see the damage before you get the Blade Dancers aspect, but once you get that Blade Dancers aspect, it changes the Rogue Twisting Blade forever. It is huge, and you really want that aspect if you want to pump out some serious damage, especially against someone like Ashava. I know, because I fought Ashava before and after that aspect, and it is night and day. So that's going to be my build for the Twisting Blade Rogue. This is most likely what I'm going to be playing the most in the beta. I will have some more Rogue builds in the future and to see how much damage I could potentially do. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you all for the next one.